Good morning, everybody. Welcome to everybody watching online, or if you're over in Westside. My name's Pete, and I'm one of the pastors here, and you're joining us for week 3 of a series we're calling You Are What You Love. And this series is based on a book by the same title by an author, theologian, philosopher named James K.A. Smith. And so I encourage you to check out the book if you're someone that's maybe a bit more theologically, philosophically minded. It's a great read. But if you don't want to read it, then just tune into this series and I'll try to explain it for you. But we are in week 3. And I am trying to build some ideas here. So I'm going to do a bit of a review. And if you haven't been here, you probably won't catch it all. So go back and watch the first 2 weeks. But if you have been here, hopefully I'll say some things that'll trigger some things for you that you go, oh yeah, I remember what we've been talking about. We've been talking about how sometimes a view of the human person takes over our minds as Western thinkers, that the human person is primarily a thinking thing. And therefore, discipleship, learning to follow Jesus, must have to do with the accumulation of information in our brains. We need to get more ideas correct in our brains, and then that will lead to the type of life that Jesus wants for us. And while we are partly thinking things, we are not primarily, or the majority of the time, being led by what we think. We are more primarily, or more the majority of the time, being led by what we love. And so instead of thinking ourselves as thinking things, begin to see yourself as a lover. You are a lover, and not a static lover. You don't have this static love for things. You have a love that has a direction to it. A direction that pulls you towards, that aims you at a telos, a word that we looked at last week. A telos meaning an end or an ultimate goal or an ultimate vision of the good life. We have all been captured, fascinated by, had our imaginations overridden by some vision of the good life, some target, some telos that pulls our hearts towards it. We are not primarily people who think things and then do the things that we think. We'd like to think that that's how we operate. But once you give that a try for a little bit of your life, you realize, I can't even do the things that I think, at least not all of the time. And that is because we are more primarily lovers who are pulled towards a telos like a magnet. But of course, there isn't just one telos, not one ultimate aim. There can be a whole smattering of ultimate teloses. We talked about this last week. You could aim your life at getting an accumulation of things, an accumulation of wealth, an accumulation of power or pleasure or sports. You could aim at any number of these things. But to become a follower of Jesus is to have had his vision of the ultimate end. His vision for human flourishing, of what the world could look like, what he called the kingdom of God. It is to have that vision capture our hearts and to begin to be pulled towards it, to begin to learn to fully love his vision of the kingdom and his vision of what the king of that kingdom will look like. And so, what we must learn to do is guard our hearts, because our life will flow from our hearts. As the proverb says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And so, it seems like it would just be as simple as that then. Guard your hearts. Guard it. Guard your spouse's heart. Guard her heart. Guard your kids' heart. Guard your family. Guard it. Guard it. Go in peace. What does this mean, though? What does it mean to guard your heart? How do I guard it? What does that look like? I think the following verses start to give us a picture of what this would look like. Keep your mouth free of perversity. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips. Pay attention to what you're saying. Pay attention to the places and the people that you are with and how those conversations tend to go. Let your eyes look straight ahead, focused on one telos. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all of your ways. Do not turn to the right or to the left. Keep your foot from evil. Pay attention. What does it mean to guard your heart? It means to pay attention to your ways, the paths. What are the rhythms, the routines, the patterns, the habits that your life is made up of? Pay attention to those. Guard those, because those are shaping your heart. To go back to my little diagram here, we could see it this way, that habits, rhythms, or to enter a new word maybe into your lexicon, liturgies. Liturgies being formative practices. Liturgies being rituals that shape what we love. Think about all these words as kind of hitting at the same idea. Habits, rhythms, liturgies, they shape our heart. They shape what we love, and they aim us at a particular telos. So what we must do is become very aware. What habits, rhythms, liturgies, paths, ways are shaping what I love? I'll say it this way, if you're taking notes, guarding your heart means guarding the liturgies or routines that you participate in. And so what we must come to do is see that cultural practices are formative liturgies that shape what we love. Now I know, even though we had an extra hour of sleep, this is a lot to take in. Some of you are like, I just learned what this word is, and now I just have to read it over and over and try to remember what it means. Just try to take it in. I knew that you would have an extra hour of sleep, and so I made a very challenging sermon for you. I can already feel it a bit in the room, and let me just put it out there. This sermon is a little bit more lofty. There are going to be some ideas, some words. I'm going to read some heavier quotes. The topic, the subject matter is going to get a little bit heavier than sometimes it is. And so just buckle up and guard your heart. Cultural practices are formative liturgies that shape what we love. The parts of our culture, the things that we are involved in our culture, are formative. They are formative rituals, routines. They form us and they shape what we love. I think about this morning. Often I go to Starbucks in the morning, especially on Sunday morning. And I think about that whole routine. I can order ahead on the app. I can make a whole routine at Starbucks where I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't even have to look at anybody. I don't have to, I'm like, that's interesting. I've been thinking this week about how that cultural practice is a formative liturgy that is shaping my heart and what I love, and perhaps feeding into my desire to not have to talk to people, because I do that a lot from a stage sometimes. But it's shaping me. What are the cultural practices that are shaping us? And so I want to give you an example of this that I get from James K.A. Smith's book, where he gives a walkthrough of a cultural practice, a formative liturgy, and it is the experience of going to the mall. It is what he would call the religious experience of going to the mall. And so I want to read it for you because it is so poetic that I couldn't memorize it, and I couldn't even really shrink it down without it losing kind of what it does. And so some of you, I am aware, as I read this, you will be lost. And that's okay. You can join us back up with the group when we're done. But some of you will appreciate the poetic language. And what I want you to listen for is listen for the religious language. Listen for words like the faithful, sacrifice, seekers, worship, pilgrimage. Listen for those words as I read through this. Because going to the mall is a cultural practice. It is a religious experience that is shaping us. Upon approach, the architecture of the building has a recognizable code that makes us feel at home, no matter what city we're in. The large glass atriums at the entrances are framed by banners and flags. Familiar texts and symbols on the exterior walls help the foreign faithful quickly and easily identify what's inside. As we enter the space, we are ushered into a narthex of sorts, intended for receiving, orienting, and channeling new seekers, as well as providing a bit of decompression space for the regular faithful to enter into the spirit of the space. For the seeker, there is a large map a kind of worship aid to help orient the novice to the locations of various spiritual offerings. The design of the interior is inviting to an almost excessive degree, drawing both seekers and the faithful into the enclosed interior spaces. With windows on the ceiling above to the sky, but none on the walls, open to the surrounding moat of automobiles. The sense conveyed is one of vertical or transcendent openness that at the same time shuts off the clamor and distractions of the horizontal, mundane world. This architectural mode of enclosure and enfolding suggests sanctuary, retreat, escape. From the entry, one is invited to lose oneself in this space that channels the pilgrim into a labyrinth of octagons and circles. As we wander the labyrinth in contemplation, preparing to enter one of the chapels, we'll be struck by the rich iconography. Here one finds an array of three-dimensional icons adorned in garb that, as with all iconography, inspires our desire to be imitators of these exemplars. These statues and icons embody for us concrete images of the good life. These are the ideals of perfection to which we will learn to aspire. This temple, like countless others now emerging around the world, offers a rich, embodied visual mode of evangelism that attracts us. This is a gospel whose power is beauty, which speaks to our deepest desires. It compels us to come, not through dire moralisms, but rather with a winsome invitation to share in this envisioned good life. As we pause to reflect on some of the icons on the outside of one of the chapels, we are thereby invited to consider what's happening within. Invited to enter into the act of worship more properly. Invited to taste and see. And so we enter in and we are greeted by a welcoming acolyte who offers to shepherd us through the experience, but also has the wisdom to allow us to explore on our own terms if we so choose. Sometimes we will enter cautiously, curiously, tentatively, having a vague sense of need but unsure how it will be fulfilled. And so we are open to surprise, to that moment where the Spirit leads us to an experience we couldn't have anticipated. Having a sense of our need, we come looking, not sure what for, but expectant, knowing that what we need must be here somewhere. After time spent focusing on and searching in what the faithful call the racks, we find the experience and offering that will provide fulfillment. With our newfound holy object in hand, we proceed to the altar that is the consummation of worship. While acolytes and other worship assistants have helped us navigate our experience, behind the altar is the priest, who presides over the consummating transaction. And this is a religion of transaction, of exchange and communion. When invited to worship here, we are not only invited to give, we are invited to take. We don't leave this transformative experience with just good feelings or pious generalities, but rather with something concrete and tangible, with newly minted relics, as it were, which are themselves the means to the good life, embodied in the icons who invited us into this participatory moment in the first place. And so we make our way and we sacrifice, leaving our donation, but get in return something with solidity that is wrapped in the colors and symbols of the saints and the season. Released by the priest with a benediction, we make our way out of the chapel in a kind of denouement, not necessarily with the intention of leaving, but rather to continue contemplation and be invited into yet another chapel. Who could resist the tangible realities of the good life so abundantly and invitingly offered? Some of you are already planning your trip to the mall. That was not the intent of this little exercise. But can you see, after taking this little journey, how our cultural practices are actually performative liturgies that shape who we are. There is a religious aspect to them. After walking through the mall in his book, he then makes this concluding statement that I found so powerful and so summarizing to where we've been so far in this series. How do we learn to be consumerists? How does that happen? Not because someone comes along and offers an argument for why stuff will make me happy. I don't think my way into consumerism. Nobody came to you and convinced you to be a consumer through an argument. Rather, I'm covertly conscripted into a way of life because I've been formed by cultural practices that are nothing less than secular liturgies. My loves have been automated by rituals I didn't even realize were liturgies. These tangible, visceral, repeated practices carry a story about human flourishing that we learn in unconscious ways. These practices are loaded with their own teleological orientation. They aim us at some vision of the good life, toward a particular vision of the good life, a rival version of the kingdom. And by our immersion in them, we are, albeit unwittingly, being taught what and how to love. I simply want to make the point this morning that cultural practices are formative liturgies that shape what we love. The experience of going to the mall is not just, I needed something, so I went and got something. You are going to be engaged in a whole litany of liturgies that are shaping your heart. And you can either be a person who is guarding against that, you are guarding your heart, or someone who just swims in the water of consumerism and so let it shape your heart. Baked into cultural practices that shape us is a telos. This is why they're so dangerous, is that they are not just neutral things. They are not just neutral rhythms that we go through. Baked into these cultural practices is a telos, a vision of the good life. Baked into the experience of going to the mall is the telos that stuff will make me happy. That stuff will fix what is broken within me. I go through the mall, and what are the images telling me constantly? You don't look like that. You don't have that. You're not like that. And what does it do within me is it produces a sort of, well, then I guess there's something wrong with me. I guess I'm broken in some sort of way. Well, how would I fix this brokenness? I must need to get the thing that they are selling. It begins to tattoo on our hearts I'm broken, therefore I shop. I'm unhappy, therefore I shop. Perhaps I am just one purchase away from fulfillment. This cultural practice of the mall, of consumerism, shapes us into people who desire to be detached, to live detached lives. Detached from what? Detached from the people who make the products, detached from the people who sell the products, detached even from the products themselves. An executive at GM famously coined this phrase as they were trying to figure out, how do we sell a new car to the person who just bought a car a year ago? What we need is a system of organized dissatisfaction. What we need to do is create organized dissatisfaction. Every year, we need to be able to produce a new product that makes people dissatisfied with the product that they just bought last year. Does it make you think of anything in your life that is a bit like that? The organized creation of dissatisfaction, which does what? Disconnects us from even the products themselves. For as quickly as I get the thing that I think might make me happy, I am just as quick to get rid of it for the next thing. We live these detached lives. Detached even from what this production of these goods and services does to people and does to creation. And so in one of his more scathing quotes from this book, so just get ready for what I'm about to read, he gives this analysis. The liturgy of consumption births in us a desire for a way of life that is destructive of creation itself. Moreover, it births in us, it shapes our hearts, it births in us a desire for a way of life that we can't feasibly extend to others, creating a system of privilege and exploitation. In short, the only way for the vision of this kingdom to be a reality is if we keep it to ourselves. The mall's liturgy fosters habits and practices that are unjust. So it does everything that it can to prevent us from asking such questions. Don't ask, don't tell, just consume. Don't think about where these products come from. Don't think about who made them. Don't think about what their lives are like. Don't think about the people that sell them. Don't think about anything. Just experience it like a magical Disneyland type experience. These products, they just fall from the heavens, and here they are for our consumption. The mall fosters a worldview where we just detach from all of it. Don't ask, don't tell, just consume. Feeling heavy and guilty yet. Oh, my goodness. Just take a breather. Maybe we can go to Jesus and find some rest. So what does Jesus have to say about this? Jesus wouldn't make me feel like this. Wouldn't make me feel like some guilty consumer with all my stuff. Would he? Luke chapter 12. Two brothers come up to Jesus. And it seems like probably the younger brother says to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my older brother to split the inheritance with me." And Jesus goes, "Man, who made me an arbiter or a judge between you guys? That's not what I'm here to do." Which is so interesting, isn't it? Like, these guys have a chance to talk to God in the flesh. And the thing that has so captured their hearts is inheritance, things. And so the first thing, if I could get Jesus' ear, I would ask him to do what? Help me get more stuff. Because that's where my heart is. If I could get more stuff, then I'd be happy. Then I'd reach the good life. And so these two brothers come and they're fighting. And Jesus sees this and he says to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." We go to Jesus and we end up right back where we began. He sees in these brothers, something has happened to your hearts. Guard, be on guard against greed taking over, shaping your heart. Because life, your telos, what you were created for, what ultimate human flourishing looks like, does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And then he begins to tell a story to illuminate his point further. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He's already rich, and he just got richer. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Why don't we just take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry? This rich man has a whole heart that has been shaped completely detached from the people around him. Completely detached from anyone else. He is already rich and he gets richer. And does he think about other people? Does he talk to God? He thinks to himself, how can I make my life even better? His heart has been shaped somehow. We don't get to know what these practices that he was involved in that shaped him, but clearly his heart has been shaped in such a way that all he can think of is get more and more stuff, which will lead to more and more security, which will make my life merry. It will make my life better. And then God steps into this story. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Imagine meeting God at the end of your life, and he looks at what you've done with all that you were given, and he says, You fool. What were you doing? What were you doing? You were already rich. You got richer. What were you doing? Like just chasing more and more stuff. Couldn't you see that life does not consist in the abundance of possessions? I read this story with a friend of mine in my office this week, and we were talking about the sermon, and so I just read through this story to see what came from it, and we both just like, when we got to the end of the story, we just kind of sat in silence, and we were like, wow. It hits something in us, because we live in a culture that has shaped us to be consumers. We live in a culture where there's a season coming up that's supposed to be all about the birth of the Messiah, and yet it has been overtaken by the, what stuff can I get? What stuff's on sale? What stuff are people going to get me? If we're honest, many of us would have to admit that the telos of bigger, better barns has captivated our hearts. That is the ultimate end that we are aiming at. Jesus, yeah, give me some of the, I like some of the Jesus teachings, but ultimately our hearts are aiming at bigger, better barns. An abundance of possessions sure would be nice. And I know that this is heavy. This is heavy for us because this is probably one of the greatest things that we will have to struggle with in the culture that we are growing up in. And so let me give us just a little bit of ease about this. Realize that you have been shaped over many, many years to be a consumer. You have been shaped through practices over years and years, some of us decades of our lives. And so to have our hearts turn towards the kingdom of God will take a learning to love. It will take discipleship to Jesus and his kingdom, and to enter into processes and liturgies and habits that will slowly capture our heart and turn us towards his kingdom. So two things that I think that we need to learn to do as we swim in this water of consumerism. One is to do a liturgical audit of our lives. What does that mean? It means pay attention. What are the habits, the rhythms, the liturgies that we are involved in? Just like how we went through the mall today, think about the other rhythms that are a part of your life. What are those? What are those? What are the ones that I do myself? What are the ones that we do as maybe a married couple? What are we doing with our family? What are the liturgies of our family? And then ask this question: what are the things that I'm doing or that we're doing to me? Because they're not just neutral practices. They all have a telos baked into them, and they are forming your heart. They are pulling your heart towards them. Do a liturgical audit of your life. And we're going to be talking about this in the next 4 weeks of the series. And also this, we need counter-formational practices. We can't just be aware of how culture is forming us. We need counter-formational practices. And hey, congratulations, you're doing one right now. You're here on Sunday for worship. This is a counter-formational practice, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to do a whole week on that. We need to spend time in prayer. That's a counter-formational practice. We're going to talk about that. We need to be serving and giving, practicing serving and generosity. We're going to do a whole week on that, but we need to build into our lives counter-formational practices that shape our hearts to love what God loves. Guarding your heart will mean guarding the cultural liturgies, the cultural practices that you are a part of. And I know that this is overwhelming, and I say that because it's overwhelming for me. Because whenever I go into this topic, when I look at Jesus' teachings about this topic, I am so convicted and left with like I feel like I suck. I feel like I suck at this. Anybody? And so a reminder, we are not engaged in this to earn God's love. We don't have to learn how to love the kingdom better and do better so that God will love us more. He already loves us, and you can't change that. And it is from his love and from his grace and from his mercy that he gives us power so that we can change. He gives us a spirit that will come into us, that as we engage in thoughtful practices of worship and generosity and serving, that the Spirit meets us there and shapes us and begins to tune our heart so that it is pulled towards his kingdom. This can really happen we have to believe that this can happen. We have to believe that we can actually form a church, a community of people that are not consumers. We have to believe this is possible, that we can be different, that we can tell or write a new parable. A parable that might sound like this. There once was a rich woman. And this rich woman, every morning when she woke up, she would thank God for the many blessings that he had given her. And she would spend time just being thankful. And this slowly over the years produced in her a heart of contentment. And she would wake up every day and she would pray, God, I want your kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven. Would you give my village and the people around me our daily bread? One day, this woman's fields produced an abundant harvest. And she thought to herself, I know what to do. I know what I will do. I will call together all of my neighbors for an elaborate feast. And so she produces this amazing celebration and she invites all of her neighbors, her friends and her enemies. And they all share in this magnificent feast. And when everyone is done eating and everyone thinks that the meal is over and wow, hasn't this been amazing? She stands up at the table and she says, I have recently come into a great amount of wealth. And I could build for myself bigger, better barns, but instead, you get a barn. And you get a barn, and you get a barn, and you get a barn. Everybody gets a barn filled with crops. Everybody gets a barn. And her generosity transforms her entire village. And one day, when she dies and slips into the heavenly realms, she meets God. And God says to her, you have loved your neighbors so well. You carved out a little slice of the world and brought my kingdom into it. Well done, my good and faithful servant. This can be us. And so I pray, asking Jesus, help us. We confess that our hearts do not belong solely to you. Though we would like them to. We live in a culture that is pulling at us in every direction to keep us from you. And so may we become more and more aware of what is shaping us and become more and more diligent to participate in the things that will shape us to be like you and to love what you love. Jesus, send your Spirit to help us, empower us to make it so, to bring heaven to earth, to participate as your kingdom comes. We pray this in your strong, resurrected name. Amen.